Europe was already facing an energy crisis this winter before Russia invaded Ukraine, but now it's getting worse. And the EU may announced a new plan or the outline of a new plan last week to deal with that. And I'm going to talk to Mike Fulwood, who's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies about that. So welcome to the interview, Mike.
Thank you very much, Markham. Pleased to be here.
Look, what can the EU do in the short term, say the next 12 months, to ensure that it has an adequate supply of gas?
Well, the EU published, as you said, their sort of plan for repowering the EU, and that had elements of the sort of short-term fixes in, if you like. I think, first of all, I think you should note that actually, since the invasion of Ukraine, gas flows from Russia on by pipeline have gone up. They've gone about 50%. As the European buyers nominated more of their contracts because of favourable pricing under the contracts relative to the price in the market. So there's no shortage of gas at the moment. But what the EU were talking about really was what they said is we can replace 2/3 of Russian gas imports. It's a bit vague on the timescale, but sort of in the next 12 months or by the end of 2022. So that's what they're really talking about, replacing that amount of imports, both pipeline and LNG, from the numbers they gave in their sort of plan. So that's what they were talking about.
And where does the EU plan to get that gas? I mean, you mentioned LNG, and who would be supplying that?
Well, there's a number of areas. One is you'd replace the gas imports from elsewhere. And the second element is they'd reduce the need for natural gas by demand side measures. So there's two elements to that. So on the replacement of Russian pipeline LNG imports, then the heavy lifting is really being done by LNG, and they made a sort of a vague sort of comment that we can get more from Qatar, the USA, Algeria, Nigeria, etc., etc. But there's really nothing more to it than that. I think from the perspective, could the EU take basically 50 billion cubic meters more of LNG? For where the LNG needs to go, there is actually in continental Europe probably not sufficient regas capacity to take that in. A lot of the EU's capacity is in Spain. You can send more to Spain, but that doesn't really help, sort of rest of Western Europe. Where you could divert some pipeline flows from Algeria, which now go to Spain to Italy, because Algeria is going to Italy as well. So that would do some of it. But what would need to happen really is that because the UK has a lot of regasification capacity, you need to import into the UK LNG, and then you can re-export it by pipeline or the interconnector to Belgium or the BBL line to the Netherlands. So it has the capacity to do so. Could it get the LNG? LNG flows were already higher this year. So even in the absence of doing anything, I think we're expecting LNG flows to be maybe about 20 billion cubic meters higher this year than last year. So that's kind of already, if you like, baked in. And you could probably squeeze maybe a little bit more out at 25, 30 BCM, because we do expect LNG supply to rise quite sharply this year. Both as new US terminals come on and some of the issues unwind from last year.
Right. So it looks like the goal of displacing 2/3 of Russian gas by next year, in your opinion, sounds doable?
No chance whatsoever. I mean, as I said, the sort of 30 BCM energy you could get, but then you've got to get the rest of LNG away from the Asian markets. So demand around the world is not going to rise as rapidly as last year, but there will be some rise. So you have to pull the Asian LNG cargoes away from that market, leaving them with lower LNG imports than last year. And then even with sort of 50 BCM, you've still got another 55 BCM or so to go to replace 2/3 of imports. A little bit more from pipeline imports, maybe. The EU suggested maybe another 10 BCM from Norway, Libya, Algeria, Azerbaijan. We think that's probably doable if you squeeze them a little bit. But the rest really comes from kind of reduce the demand for gas, and that's what they're talking about. Some of the assumptions there are pretty heroic in terms of what needs to be done.
What are some of those assumptions, and what are the plans to displace gas?
Well, one of them was to increase biomethane production by 3.5 BCM, but that's a small amount, but it's almost a doubling of biomethane production in the next few months, which is not practical really. They did talk about sort of if we turn our thermostats down 1 degree centigrade, put a jumper on, put some gloves on, save 10, 12, 13 billion cubic meters. I mean, I guess if everybody did that, then you can do that. But it ultimately depends on what's the outside temperature. In a mild winter, and we obviously don't need as much gas as in a cold winter. That'd be a big swing there. But theoretically, you do that. They also talked about bringing forward a lot of more renewables, wind and solar, which is, yes, we can maybe bring forward a little bit, but there's quite long lead times for all these projects. So I think the replacement of that amount of demand is shall we say, is a bit of a challenging assumption to do that. So I think with challenging demand and probably not going to meet the supply replacement, I think it's a pretty heroic assumption to assume you could replace that amount of Russian LNG. Apart from the fact, how do you actually reduce Russian pipeline gas coming in? How do you do it?
So it sounds like from your comments that it's unlikely that in the short term, say the next 12 to 24 months, that Europe is going to be successful in displacing that gas. And which sounds like then there's going to be shortages. Now, does that mean that they simply don't displace as much Russian gas as they had expected, or do they take other measures, or pay higher prices, or what are their options there?
Well, I mean, if you restrict supply for whatever reason, you're going to force the price up. I mean, if you did, for example, lose 2/3 of Russian gas coming into Europe, you basically can't meet your winter demand. So you get what we call demand destruction or unmet demand. So it means power plant blackouts, industrial closures. You just physically can't do it, almost whatever the price is, because there is a limited given amount of supply at any one time in the world, and you can squeeze as much as you can, but you just can't physically meet that. So it seems to us to be a remote possibility you could replace that amount.
So it sounds like in the next year or two that Europe's going to have a big challenge to meet its get the energy it needs from the gas side. What about in the longer term, out to 2030? Is that more realistic to that electricity, for instance, and hydrogen can displace that gas?
Well, you've got a sporting chance, I think, of doing that. Certainly, I think more with rolling out more renewables is always a strong possibility. Accelerate that. And the hydrogen, I think, even by 2030, that what they're saying on hydrogen is a bit remote, really. I think that's not likely to happen. I think on the gas side, I mean, you've got better prospects of replacing, maybe not 2/3, but a significant proportion of Russian or imports from Russia, because when we come to the mid-2020s, we do prospectively have a lot of LNG supply coming on the market. Some from the US, some Mozambique, or a lot of even from Russia itself, a lot of projects around the world. So there's a big surge in supply, and we could see more FIDs, final investment decisions, being taken this year, adding more to supply. There's a much better chance of replacing, if that's what they want to do, imports from Russia by the time we get to 2030, as well as actually putting in place measures to reduce the demand for gas, which is what a lot of their proposals are based on.
Mike, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Mark.